Chapter 76 Code Dash Operation. In the silent hall, a crowd of red-hot gazers unwaveringly stared at the little jade bottles on the table, which numbered over 1,000. Almost no one had ever personally seen such a large quantity of elixirs. Her pink tongue licked her red lips subconsciously. Xiao was equally dazed at the sight of so many elixirs. A moment later, she shook herself out of the daze and, with a sparkle in her eyes, she turned her sight to watch the black-cloaked person. The green-clothed maiden seated by the window shot a glance at the table full of small jade bottles with an astonished look flashing within those beautiful autumn water eyes. Her vision once again swept across the black-cloaked person. Unable to find anything suspicious, she continued to look at the simple book in her hand. In the absolute silence of the hall, the black-cloaked person coughed softly, bringing the person next to him, Zizon, back to reality. Zizon blushed as he let out an embarrassed laughter. As he looked to the black-cloaked alchemist, the respect in his gaze had gained another level. Not every alchemist would be able to effortlessly bring out over 1,000 bottles of healing medicine at once. Sir, you should know about the Z clan's current situation. We need healing medication to pull back our lost popularity. To the Z clan, your actions are undoubtedly providing help when we need it the most. Zizon exclaimed gratefully. Slightly muttering to himself, Zizon hesitated before he finally spoke out again. How about this? Our Z clan will take the responsibility of selling these healing medicine. As for the earnings, so you will take 90% while the remaining 10% will go to us. Although I feel it is brazen of us to do so, after all, we still need some money to put things in order. Sir, what do you think about that? As he finished outlining his proposition, Zizon nervously gazed at the black-cloaked man before him, afraid that he will not be satisfied with the terms. The current Z clan could only completely depend on this mysterious alchemist. Ha ha! The black-cloaked alchemist laughed before shaking his head. Seeing this action, the expression on Zizon's face slightly changed. Just as he was about to forfeit the last 10%, an old voice interjected which left him dazed and at a complete loss. Clan leader Z is too polite. Although the elixir is refined by me, making sales is not an easy job. How can I possibly take advantage of you? Let us split it evenly, 50-50, ha ha. At the black-cloaked man's words, the originally anxious three elders and the rest of the clansmen suddenly opened their mouths in shock. It was quite a while before they subconsciously touched their ears, skeptical if the words were genuine or not. 50-50. This, sir, isn't he to consider it to Z clan? Given the current situation, even if he wanted all 100% of the profits, no one in the Z clan would dare object. Meat pies have dropped from the skies. This phrase resounded in everyone's hearts as they looked towards each other. After a long while more, Zizon gradually regained his wits. He let out a deep breath, then laughed bitterly, saying, Sir, your words have overwhelmed us. We are already truly grateful for your timely aid. How can we possibly take any further advantage of you? As if it was of little importance, the black-cloaked man waved his hands about and smugly laughed. This little bit of profits holds no interest for me. If it were not for the fact that you would never rest easy, truth to be told, I would be too lazy to collect even 50%. Hearing this sort of arrogant explanation, Zizon could only shake his head as he smiled bitterly. I'll leave these elixirs for you to sell. If I have some time in the future, I will come and check up on them. The black-cloaked man stood up and smiled as he said, I still have other matters, so I won't be staying. Clan leader Z need not send me off. Go and set up arrangements for the sales instead. Ha ha. With a tone of dismissal, he walked out of the hall under everyone's stares. Before completely exiting the room, the black-cloaked alchemist's steps suddenly stopped. Laughing faintly, he said, Before I go, I'll say a few words more. Ziyan really isn't bad. Ha ha, goodbye. Hearing this statement, Zizon rubbed his head. He was about to say something, but the black-cloaked man had already breezed out of the hall, gradually fading out of sight around the corner. Staring at the black-cloaked man's disappearing figure, Zizon let out a small sigh after a long while as he laughed bitterly, saying, It seems that the relationship between Yana and this sir is a bit out of the ordinary. Or else, how could this person who isn't even familiar with us help us like this? The three elders all shared a glance and also let out a sigh and nodded. From the way the old alchemist had been expressing praise about Ziyan, he clearly looked favorably on Ziyan, and his help to Z clan would definitely be tied to Ziyan. Within the hall, all the members of the Z clan who were of Ziyan's age who had heard the black-cloaked man's passing words showed undisguised envy on their faces. The blue-clothed maiden near the window slightly inclined her head, her vision gazing through the window as the figure turned around the corner. Her willow brows slightly knitting together, an expression of doubt flashed across her delicate face. Outside of the Z clan, the black-cloaked man slowly continued forward until he reached a less crowded area. Only then did a young voice softly grumble from within the black gown. "Teacher, do you have nothing better to do than to point me out every single sentence? If they find out about this, I cannot guarantee that I will not offer you up." "Hehe, I was only expressing my feelings. If it were not for Zizon who treated you well since you were young, where would I find such a good disciple? Thus it is only appropriate for me to thank him." The old voice bantered and laughed. "If I just gave them the pills, your cautious father would definitely believe that I had some ulterior motives." Helplessly shaking his head, Ziyan looked around before asking, "Where shall we go now?" "Towards the auction house, so we can pass the Che-gathering powder to them, so as to avoid owing them a debt. That is something that I hate the most. Furthermore, you have burnt up all the medical ingredients for practice. It is time to purchase other medical ingredients." Yao Lo muttered as he smiled. Ziyan nodded to acknowledge these words. With some expectations, he smiled sweetly and asked, "Teacher, can the current me be counted as a first-tier alchemist?" "Chi, you think that just because you refined a few days' worth of medicine you've become an alchemist? Healing medication is the simplest kind of elixir. Refining that kind of stuff is nothing to be proud of." Yao Lo sneered, ruthlessly dousing Ziyan with cold water. Rolling his eyes, Ziyan was a bit gloomy. "Then when can I genuinely be considered as a first-tier alchemist?" In the alchemy world, the minimum requirement for a first-tier alchemist is to be able to refine a pellet-type pill, and not the simple kind where all you have to do is mix essences into a paste. It seems that there's quite a distance for me to go. Hearing these requirements, Ziyan helplessly shook his head and strode forward, advancing towards the auction house in the city square. Chapter 77. Breaking the supply of ingredients. Prima auction house, the reception lobby. On top of a table, there was a small jade case, in which a medicine pill lay peacefully. Due to the smooth, round, and glossy pill, a strong, nice fragrance pervaded the room, causing everyone to feel attentive. Watching the pills, the two managers of the Prima auction house, Xiao and Gueno, couldn't hide the glee on their faces. Through the black gown, Ziyan could see that the two were forgetting themselves in front of him, which caused him to inwardly express disapproval and ridicule them. If they knew that Yao Lo skimped on the materials when he made this Che-gathering powder, what would their expressions be like? The Che-gathering powder Ziyan brought was very much inferior to the product he himself used, and yet this powder, half-heartedly created by Yao Lo, was able to surprise both Xiao and Gueno. "My dear sir, your alchemy techniques are truly admirable. The Che-gathering powder you created can already be compared to that made by fifth-tier alchemists." Gueno wholeheartedly praised the light green pill. Under the black cloak, an old voice lightly rang out, "Please receive this Che-gathering powder well. After receiving so much help, I just had to express my thanks, or else my conscience would be deeply perturbed." "Ha ha, sir, you are too kind. You are a guest here, and the favors between us are simply favors between friends." Xiao smiled while lifting up the case with jade-like hands. Yao Lo refrained from commenting. Not only did Yao Lo not believe those words, even Ziyan scoffed at them as well. If it were really as she said, the premier auction house would have been bankrupt already. From inside his clothes, Ziyan produced a piece of paper and handed it to Xiao. The old voice rang out, "Please do me another favor by finding these materials for me." Eagerly accepting the paper, Xiao quickly glanced over it before complying with a smile. After the previous time, she dared not show any hesitation now. Xiao called forth a serving girl with a wave and passed the paper to her, instructing her to prepare the ingredients as soon as possible. Teacup in his hands, Ziyan lightly sipped. Suddenly, he thought of something, and after a few seconds, Yao La's voice could be heard. "Miss Xiao, I have a question." Hearing Yao Lo start to talk, Yuefei smiled sweetly and gently replied, "Please go ahead, sir. The GLI clan has bought a lot of medicine ingredients from here, right?" Yao Lo questioned in a monotonous voice. At this question, Yuefei's heart slightly tightened and the expression on her lovely face slightly changed. Stealthily sharing a quick glance with Guenai, she silently hesitated for a moment before replying. Previously, the GLI clan had indeed purchased almost 100,000 gold worth of medicine ingredients, and these medical ingredients also possess some healing properties. Slightly inclining his head, his old voice suddenly disappeared into silence. This sudden change in atmosphere from the black-cloaked man caused Yuefei's heart to feel somewhat nervous. She long ago knew that the former was preparing to help the Z clan, and yet the auction house kept selling large amounts of medicine ingredients to the GLI clan. Though she does not know his temperament, it is highly likely that this old gentleman would hold some grudge against the auction house. The mood in the hall gradually became oppressive. Looking towards the silent black-cloaked man, Yuefei started to feeling restless. If it were not for Guenai constantly stopping her with his looks, she would have opened her mouth long ago. Both of you should know what I intended to do by buying so much medicine ingredients last time, right? A good while later, the old voice finally broke the stifling silence. Lightly nibbling on her red lips, Yuefei slightly nodded her head and replied in a low tone, "So had intended to refine the ingredients into healing medication to aid the Z clan, yes. Just before I came, I handed over all of the refined healing medicine to the Z clan." Slightly nodding, Yao Lo said in a deep voice, "Perhaps in another 2 days, the Z clan and the GLI clan will start to use healing medicine to battle for popularity in Wutan City." Faced with this kind of topic, Yuefei did not know how to reply, thus she could only cleverly maintain her silence. The manufacturing of healing medication requires a large amount of low-grade medical ingredients. In Wutan City, besides Primo Auction House, no other medicine stall has the capabilities to provide such a large amount. Seeing the wordless Yuefei, Yao Lo continued to remark to himself, "In the later stages of this healing medication battle, besides the price and quality, having a sufficient supply of medicine ingredients is a key factor. Thus I hope that Primo Auction House will decline to provide the GLI clan with medicine ingredients from now on." Just as Yao Lao's voice resounded out, Ziyan's line of sight penetrated through the black mantle and focused upon the mature beauty who was as lovely as a fox spirit. He had less than 2 months left in Wutan City, and thus, within this time, he had to help his father to defeat the GLI clan. Only then could he leave on the training journey with Yao Lo at ease. Yuefei's charming face slightly changed as she heard Yao Lao's words. In a difficult position, she said, "So, our Primo Auction House has a rule that forbids us from involving in any kind of conflicts between the clans. If we agree to your request, that would be tantamount to indirectly helping the Z clan. This is not in accordance to our rules. I can refine Tuche gathering pills for you free of costs." Yao Lo said, undisturbed, "Sir, it is not a problem of elixirs, truly." The enticement of Tuche gathering pills caused Yuefei's smooth hands to tremble. However, she continued to endure. 3 pills, Yuefei forced a smile. Right beside her, Guni's face contorted. 3 Che gathering pills. That would be worth at least 500,000 gold, right? 5 pills. An aged voice armed with an indifferent tone relentlessly smashed against the baseline in Yuefei's heart. Yuefei's large eyes screwed shut as she lightly inhaled a breath of ice-cold air. After a long time, her eyes abruptly opened. Yuefei let out a bitter laugh as she said, "Sir, you've won. From now on, Primo Auction House will never again provide the GLI clan with any medical ingredients. Miss Yuefei's will is indeed somewhat beyond my expectations. 1 month later I will bring over the goods. Of course only if Primo Auction House does not let me down." Yao Lo said as he let out a small laugh. "Sir, be at ease. Yuefei knows who is important and who is not very clearly. In any case, Yuefei had already experienced many years in the auction house, thus she quickly calmed down. Between the GLI clan and an alchemist who was at the very least 4th tiered, there was absolutely no comparison. The choice was not hard to make. Actually, the true difficulty laid in how to select the best moment to earn the greatest profits, and Yuefei was very satisfied with the current outcome. Chapter 78. training and then breakthrough. Only after seeing the black-clothed man walked out of the lounge, satisfied with the ingredients in his hand, could Liu Xi finally relax her shoulders. Her body was cuddled up on top of the chair, making her look like a curled-up fox. This lethargic position of hers had a peculiar charm to it. "This, dear sir, is truly daring," said Liu Xi with her head stuck to the cool back of the chair. Beside her, Guinai was rubbing his forehead, sighing, 5 pills of gathering cha powder. It's true that he's a 4th-tier alchemist, but still, isn't his way of conducting business a bit grand? Liu Xi nodded and pursed her red, small lips before proceeding to mock herself. "I thought I could last against his pressure, but who would have thought?" Guinai laughed, replying, "If it were me in your shoes, I'm afraid I would have gave in by the time he mentioned the 3rd pill. You were able to exceed my expectations and persevere until the 5th, so be proud of it. What I showed was perseverance." Upon hearing his offer, my mind blanked out, and so I wasn't able to think straight. But who would have thought ... that he would be so forward with his request and threw in 2 extra pills, said Liu Xi while rolling her eyes. She couldn't refrain from laughing at the situation. "Well, facts are facts, and your mind blanking out helped the Primer auction house rake in an extra 400,000 income," expressed Guinai while laughing after he heard her explanation. Liu Xi used her hand to cover up her mouth, letting out a few tender laughs. As she started to get up from her chair, she sighed, "Looks like the Jialai clan is in for it now." Guinai agreed as well, nodding his head. "But doesn't it seem a bit suspicious? Isn't our dear sir supposed to be a complete stranger to the Z clan? Why is he helping them so much? He's even willing to spare 5 pills of Che gathering powder to cut off the Jialai clan's supply chain," Liu Xi said while a hint of suspicion flashed across her eyes. "Who knows, our respected alchemist sure is mysterious, isn't he?" "I didn't know that the Jiamo Empire had a figure like him," said Guinai helplessly. Liu Xi nodded slightly, her eyes wandering. After muttering a bit, she replied, "Looks like having a phenomenal relationship with the Z clan will be a must. With these pills, I've increased the profits of the auction house by 4-fold. Let's see if anyone can surpass me at the next employee assessment, shall we?" After these words were said, the ends of her red lips formed a smile. With hands behind her back, she exited the lounge while humming a song to herself. Walking out of the auction house, Ziyan let out a long sigh. In a low voice he said, "Teacher, thank you very much." "What's there to thank? If the Jialai clan is not stamped to the ground, would you be able to concentrate when I bring you on the training journey?" Yao Luo helplessly replied. "Hehe." Ziyan grinned. Without any further words, he followed his usual twisting and turning about the streets routine before taking off the black mantle in an empty corner and carefully exiting the street, heading towards the Z clan. Back at the clan, when Ziyan occasionally met another clan member, he could feel that their gazes were filled with even more envy. Evidently, word of what had happened in the hall today had spread amongst the clan. Ziyan ignored these looks as he continued his slow journey towards his room. As he turned a corner, a girl in red suddenly appeared in a head-on collision course. Thankfully, Ziyan braked to a halt in time, successfully avoiding the awkward crash that had threatened to unfold. "Ziyan Zheizhe, I've finally found you." The girl in red retreated a step back and lifted her head. Her young and pure face contained its own type of charm. The combination was a bit contradictory, causing the girl to have a little more indescribable charm compared to other girls of the similar age. This kind of charm even made Ziyan glance a few more times. This girl whose face was filled with joy was none other than Zmei. Ziyan's gaze swept across Zmei's pretty face. Rubbing his nose, he asked in a monotonous voice, "Is there anything?" As she heard this somewhat unfamiliar greeting, Zmei's radiant face slightly darkened. In a low voice, she answered, "Clan leader wants Ziyan Zheizhe to make a trip to the study room." Slightly startled, Ziyan nodded and smiled in reply. "Okay, got it, thanks." He waved goodbye before turning towards the study room located in the front courtyard. "Ziyan Bazhe, thank you for before," Zmei softly said as she watched Ziyan's straightforward and clear-cut steps walking away. A flash of disappointment could be seen in her eyes as she bit her lip. Ziyan paused his step as he elegantly waved towards Zmei without turning, coolly replying, "No problem." Staring at Ziyan's retreating figure, all of a sudden, Zmei gathered her courage to ask, "Ziyan Bazhe, Will you be participating in the enrollment test for Jianan Academy, maybe? With both hands on the back of his head, Xiao slowly and gradually left, leaving behind this word. When Xiao heard Ziyan's reply, her overcast but pretty face finally brightened. Pinching her hands into a fist, she stood on the spot as she looked as Ziyan's figure finally faded from sight before lightly and bitterly sighing and turning around to leave. Ziyan strolled about in the clan before he finally arrived in front of a spacious room. Lightly knocking on the door, he slowly pushed the door open and entered. In the room, Zizon and the three elders were discussing something, but as they saw Ziyan enter, they closed their mouths in unison. "Father, you were looking for me?" With a smile on his face, Ziyan walked up and asked. Zizon smiled back as he nodded his head, glancing at the three elders. He hesitated before asking in a low voice, "You should have seen that old sir, right?" "Yes." Ziyan inclined his head. Naturally, he knew what Zizon was referring to. "Do you know where he came from?" Zizon muttered. "I've only known him for a short time. How could I find out about his origins?" These were Ziyan's heartfelt words, as he really did not know exactly where Yao came from. "But I know that he is an alchemist." Ziyan smiled and added, "Nonsense." Zizon rolled his eyes as he smiled, whole scolding playfully. Zizon shook his head and laughed. With an excellent mood, he continued to ask Ziyan a few more questions about Yao. However, Ziyan's muddled and silly replies meant that in the end, Zizon did not manage to find out anything. "You little brat, I can't even tell if you're pretending." As he gazed at a seemingly completely ignorant Ziyan, Zizon could not help but shake his head helplessly. With a flourish of his hand, he continued to speak. "Forget it. Go and continue whatever it is you were doing. If you meet that old sir in the future, try not to offend him. The future of the Z clan depends on him." Ziyan shrugged his shoulders, declining to comment. Ziyan, your current aura seems somewhat strong." The first elder stared at Ziyan and suddenly stuttered out. At the first elder's words, Zizon was also startled, concentrating his gaze to sweep across Ziyan. A moment later, his mouth slowly gaped open, and he let out in amazement, You have made a breakthrough to Doji." Hearing these words, the corners of the second and third elder mouths pulled apart, as they stared in disbelief at the youth in front of them. Ziyan scratched his head before innocently spreading out his hands. "I think so. I was just training as usual, and then somehow made a breakthrough." The corners of Zizon's eyes jumped, shocked at this development. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, "What kind of training was that?" Over this period of time, Zizon had already gotten used to the miracles created by Ziyan. With a wave of his hand, Zizon forced a smile and said, "It's good that you made a breakthrough. If you have some time, go to the Rank Testing Association to receive a rank badge." Ziyan nodded, the corners of his mouth raising playfully. "Then can I leave now? Honestly, I just trained and then broke through. You can get going already." Rolling his eyes, Zizon playfully scolded him. This young fellow was simply ruffling people's feathers. Did he truly not know that when these three elders were condensing their chi cyclone, they failed twice in a row before becoming a doji? Staring at the stiff faces of the three elders, Ziyan grinned and broke out into laughter. Only after Zizon began scolding him again did he scurry out of the study. Hearing the fading laughter of that youth, the three elders' faces slightly loosened up. Looking at each other, they couldn't help but laugh with faces full of bitterness. Chapter 79, Counterattack by the Z Clan. After receiving the secret aid of Ziyan in the form of the large quantity of healing medication, though the Z Clan did not publicize this news, they had already secretly started to prepare for their counterattack against the GLI clan. The events that occurred in the clan hall were kept a secret by Zizon and the three elders. Everything regarding the healing medicine had been classified as the highest scale of prohibition. None of the clan members could mention this to the outsiders. If anyone were to leak information, that person shall be punished according to the clan's rule. Along with the silence of the Z family, the behavior of the GLI clan became more and more arrogant, using all kinds of tricks and enticements without restraint to pull away all the customers of the Z family's market. Even with this, the Z clan remained silent. Seeing the Z family watching in silence, some of the small forces allied with them became disappointed and also started to secretly prepare to move to protect themselves. With an atmosphere a little bit stranger than normal, today's time quietly passed. It was another day of radiant and enchanting sunny weather while Jialai Clan's market was as hot and crowded like always. On the main street, people's heads were flowing like water. On the return of spring powder stall, there was an even larger crowd of people. The sound of shouting, scolding, and scuffles all gathered in one place. The deafening voices pierced through the clouds. Behind the brown medicine counter, a medicine salesman of the Jialai clan was watching the arguing mercenaries fighting over the medicine. The smile on his face had a prideful look, knowing he had an advantage by being the only supplier of the medicine. Jialai Ku was a core member of the Jialai clan and was in charge of Jia Li's clan's most popular market. Standing on the second floor of the reception hall, Jialai Ku looked down from high above upon the big streets of crowded people. His fat and oily face was filled with a complacent smile. During this period of time, return of spring powder had sold far more than Jialai clan's initial estimates. Under the huge temptation of benefits, the Jialai clan was no longer satisfied as they moved the price from 100 gold to 300 gold. Initially, the many mercenaries were disgusted by the price increase. However, there was no other supplier for the return of spring powder. Thus they could only make a din and complain for a while before grudgingly accepting the reality of getting cheated. Jialai Ku lightly hummed a small tune as his eyes pulled into a line and happily said, "Even if you don't buy, other people will still buy." Jialai Ku extended his short and fat hand to block the rays of the sun, unable to endure. He wiped the sweat off his forehead as he grumbled, "Damn, it's way too hot today. Looks like I'll have to release some of my hot spunk tonight to cool off." Chi, the young girl from last time, was so refreshing and lively. As he recalled the ecstasy of that forbidden place, Jialai Ku was filled with an unbearable impatience, yet again wiping his sweat. Then his brows suddenly wrinkled up at the sight of a disturbance at the entrance. Damn it, fighting again. These mercenaries are all brawn and no brain. Do they not know that it costs money to fix the things they break? As Jialai Ku gazed at the disturbance, he could not help but curse in irritation. The Z clan marketplace has also started selling healing medication. Just when Jialai Ku was preparing to send guards to settle the disturbance, a loud shout was suddenly heard from the main street. When Jialai Ku heard this sudden shout, the fat all over his body jiggled like a mountain crashing into the sea, and on his face, his complexion slightly changed. However, a moment later he sneered and said, "Looks like there's no hope left for the Z clan to actually come up with this kind of methods. They are practically asking for death." The shout had caused the once noisy main street to elapse into a period of silence. However, as everyone started looking at each other in dismay, one by one, the crowd started cursing. "Damn it. Don't even think about using this kind of dirty tactics to steal the place I had been queuing half a day for." It was clear that these people believed that the shout was a ploy to take the chance to shamelessly push to the front of the queue. After all, this kind of trick was common during this period of time. After cursing, these people continued their rush for the return of spring powder again. Of course, not everyone had these thoughts. A small portion of the mercenaries who were sick and tired of the overbearing conduct of the Jialai clan decided to check. After hesitating for a while, they chose to squeeze out of the street and head towards the Z clan marketplace, half in doubt yet half in belief. Standing upstairs, Jialai Ku looked at the still extremely popularity on the main street. He could not help but laugh proudly and spoke shaddily. "Z clan, hey, let's see how long you can persevere. Later on in Wutan City, the Jialai clan may be the only big clan. The times of the three influential clans. Hehe, those days have left forever." The effect of the shout from before on the busy marketplace was like a leaf dropping into the vast ocean. It barely made any ripples. The popularity of the Jialai clan was not in the least bit affected. Naturally, this was only temporary. Half an hour after the shout, a few burly men wearing mercenary garb appeared before the marketplace entrance of the Jialai clan. They rudely barged into the marketplace, bumping and pushing over the guards. With gleeful faces, they lifted the green jade bottles in their hands high into the air as they shouted out in unison, momentarily suppressing the noise of the marketplace. The Z clan is also selling healing medication. Their unified shout caused the marketplace to fall into silence as everyone's gazes turned to the source of the shout, a flash of understanding in their eyes. One of the burly mercenaries who had just barged in hurriedly jumped onto a large rock nearby. With a cong sound, he drew the broadsword at his side before gritting his teeth as he pulled it over his arm, drawing a fresh line of blood. Lifting his blooded arm for all to see, the burly man tilted the green jade bottle in his other hand as a thick and viscous crimson-red liquid slowly poured out to cover the wound. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the thick and viscous crimson-red liquid invaded the wound. A moment later, the flow of the blood that was previously surging out slowed, and to everyone's surprise, the blood had already congealed to form a thin layer over the wound. On the main street, the gazes of all who had personally seen this scene suddenly lit up with passion. This kind of rapid staunching effect was essential to any mission. This is the new product sold by the marketplaces of the Z clan called blood clotting medicine. Not only is it more effective, but its price is also lower than the spring of return powder by more than half. What are you people waiting for? Do you enjoy being extorted like idiots? Still not dispersing. The burly mercenary held up the jade bottle as he cracked open his mouth and laughed savagely. The main street was in silence. One of the mercenaries who had just entered the marketplace blankly stared at the green bottle in the burly man's hand. A split second later, he abruptly turned around and ran. Gazing up on the shadow of the man who had desperately run out of the marketplace, the crowd in the marketplace slightly wavered before loudly moving off. Together, their steps caused the ground to tremble as the crowd frantically stampeded out of the marketplace. On the rock, a strange smile floated upon the face of the burly mercenary at the sight of the frantic crowd. As a wind blew across the clothes of the burly man, a Z clan emblem was faintly exposed. After the huge commotion, the originally bustling marketplace was suddenly deserted. Besides the few merchants who were still dumbstruck at the scene, there was barely anyone left on the main street. The Z clan has started their counterattack. This thought raced across all of the merchants as they gazed upon the now empty main street. They exchanged gazes, and as one they lifted their heads to look upon Xiao. At this moment, the once gleeful fatty was already paralyzed on the spot with a deathly pale complexion on his face. Meanwhile, in the other marketplaces of the Xiao clan, similar situations were occurring. Chapter 80. Alchemist Liu Xi. The atmosphere in the brightly lit hall felt stifling and oppressive. In the middle of the hall stood a table, and at its center rested a small green jade bottle. From that bottle, a faint medicine smell emanated. Many people were seated within the hall. From their attire, it was evident that they were the many upper echelons of the Xiao clan. Xiao was also seated among them. In the hall, on the leftmost side, reclined a white-clad youth lazily against the back of a chair. In truth, the youth would have looked rather charming, if it weren't for the lust-filled look frequently flashing across his eyes, degrading his image. While he reclined, one of his hands could be seen slowly burrowing into the clothes of the pretty maid beside him. Even though there were so many people around him, no one seemed to care about such an unbridled action. The pretty maid's cheeks slightly paled with the youth's vulgar act, but she did not even make a sound. But it was clear that a trembling, restrained look was brewing in her eyes as her tender body continuously shuddered. This is the blood-clotting medicine that the Z clan suddenly came up with, and now our popularity in the markets has already begun to plummet. Xiao gazed upon the small green bottle on the table with a gloomy face, acting as if he did not see any of the youth in white's rude actions. How could the Z clan have healing medication? Could it be that they have also managed to get an alchemist? Xiao, who often clashed with Ziyan, cast a glance at the man in white beside him before frowning and asking. Xiao squinted his old wrinkled eyes, an ugly expression on his face. Does anyone remember the mysterious alchemist we met at the auction house? At that time, he seemed to favor the Z clan. If this blood-clotting medicine is refined by him, then we are in big trouble. As you all may know, that person could be a third-tier alchemist. Hearing the term third-tier alchemist, the white-clothed youth finally stopped the hand that was roving about the maid's body reluctantly. He stepped forward and picked up the small green bottle to take a small whiff before pouring out a little of the contents and lightly rubbing it between his fingers. With a sneer, he concluded, "A third-tier alchemist. Bull. This blood-clotting medicine is indeed more effective than the return of spring powder, but based on its quality, the person who refined it is obviously of a lower tier than me. The greater effectiveness of the medicine is due to the unique recipe. At this information, everyone seated inwardly let out a sigh of relief. If the Xi clan had really obtained the help of a third-tier alchemist, then the Jialai clan would have probably been doomed. From my experience, it is highly likely that the alchemist from the Xi clan is just a complete novice who somehow managed to borrow this recipe from God knows where to manufacture this blood-clotting medicine. On the face of the white-clothed youth, there was only indifference and disdain. Hehe, being able to see a maker's skills from a tiny bottle of medicine, Liu Xi Daji's insight is truly vicious. Jia Liao smiled with a hint of flattery. It is merely one of the basic skills of an alchemist. Having been called Liu Xi with so much flattery, the white-clothed youth modestly shook his head. However, an obscure pleased look floated upon his face, which did not manage to escape the observation of the old wily foxes seated around him. Although the return of spring powder loses out to the blood-clotting medicine in terms of quality, the difference between the two isn't dramatic. The main reason why our marketplaces are losing popularity is because previously we had raised the price too much. After we reevaluate our prices, our popularity will slowly return, but lowering it back to its previous cost will be challenging. After all, this blood clot medicine will definitely pull away many customers. It seems that in the future, the Xi clan will also gain a foothold in the healing medication market of Wutang City. Jialai Bai slowly muttered, "Reevaluate the prices." At these words, Liu Mu wrinkled his brows, evidently unwilling to cope with any sudden price reduction since he had already gotten used to the high prices. Having seen the look on Liu Mu's face, Jialai Bai inwardly cursed at how brainless Liu Mu was before obligingly explaining with a smile on his face, "Mr. Liu Mu, the current market situation is unlike before. Previously, we monopolized the healing medicine market in Wutang City, but now, that is no longer so. Thus, we need to reduce our prices to regain our popularity." Liu Mu grudgingly shook his head, curling his lip. He said, "Do whatever you want, but remember, even if you reduce the price, I still get the cut we talked about when the medicine was worth 300 gold. Jialai Bai's eyes couldn't help but twitch as a cloud of anger began to descend upon his mind. He took a deep breath to calm down. His face still wore a smiling expression, however it seems to have grown a little colder. "Ha, of course. I will definitely pay Liu Mu's share as we agreed." "Okay." A satisfied look on his face, Liu Mu nodded his head and once again returned to his seat. Even more unbridled than before, he dragged the pretty maid onto his lap. "Mr. Liu Mu, we do not have much return of spring powder left. Earlier, I have already sent people to the Prima auction house to purchase ingredients. When the time comes, I'm afraid I'll have to inconvenience you again." Jialai Bai smiled before supplementing, "Additionally, I managed to buy a pair of valuable Turjaya desert snake women yesterday, and I have already sent them to your room." When Liu Mu heard that he had to refine medicine again, a look of impatience flashed clearly across his face, yet after hearing the two words, "snake women," the impatience immediately changed into a perverted expression. With the flame of lust burning in his eyes, he nodded his head and took charge of the situation. As long as there is enough medicine ingredients, the clan leader need not worry about the quantity of return of spring powder. At the sight of a Liu Mu who was so easy to control, the corners of Jialai Bai's mouth turned to form an expression of disdain. Inwardly he sneered, with only thoughts controlled by lust. Besides knowing alchemy, he has no other good points. Jialai Bai sneered as he shook his head, lifting his teacup with both hands to his mouth to take a sip before engaging in the topic Liu Mu was most interested in, sexual affairs, smiling all the while. As he was once again making light talk with Liu Mu, a clan member hastily barged into the hall, quickly arriving at Jialai Bai's side before lowering his head to speak some words into Jialai Bai's ear in a hushed tone. With a smile on his face, Jialai Bai listened to the clan member's report. A moment later, the smile on his face went rigid. Kocha, the teacup in his hand, was suddenly crushed to dust, and the dust and tea mixed together as they flowed down his hand, dripping onto the floor. That wretched Prima auction house, to actually use such a ploy with me? With a face full of fury, Jialai Bai abruptly stood up and roared in anger. A berserker suddenly exploded out of his body, forming tiny whirlwinds, which hissed in midair. Seated closest to Jialai Bai, Jialai suddenly found it hard to breathe due to the imposing chair that emitted from his father, and hastily rushing a few steps back, he anxiously shouted, "Father, Jialai shout aloud Jialai by to regain his senses. His face slightly twitched before coldly sitting down and saying, Prima Auction House has refused to sell our Jialai clan any more medicine ingredients. Once these words were said, the entire hall was in uproar. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Alarm was visible on their faces. How can it be possible? Hasn't Prima Auction House always preserved their neutrality? How can they suddenly choose to oppose the Jialai clan? Jialai Ke's complexion changed at Jialai B's words and shuddered while involuntarily voicing his thoughts. If there were enough incentive, who would pointlessly maintain their neutrality? Jialai Bi coldly snorted in reply as he slowly spit out a sigh. He cast a glance towards the Liu Xi who was in a sorry state due to his chair before icily saying, I fear that the Z clan had some hand in this matter. They shouldn't have the ability to cause Prima Auction House to refuse to sell us medicine ingredients, right? Jialai muttered. Humph, who knows what kind of conditions they used to move Prima Auction House? Jialai Bi stroked his aged face and, without knowing why, a sense of unease filled his heart. What can we do now? Without enough medical ingredients, our stock of the return of spring powder will quickly run out. At that time, it would be our turn to experience the spectacle of an empty marketplace. Jialai Ku anxiously said. Jialai Bi ground his teeth and coldly replied, There are quite a few medical ingredient stores who still stand by our side. First, send people to buy all of the medical ingredients they have to support ourselves as much as possible over this period of time. If even then we are still unable to survive, then go to the other cities and towns to buy medical ingredients at high prices. I don't believe that the influence of the Z clan will reach the other nearby cities and towns. As the words left his mouth, Jialai Bi took another teacup only to realize that his hands were lightly trembling. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Jialai Bi had an inexplicable feeling that the Jialai clan had stirred up something that should never have been touched.